Hi everyone, Dr. Pedram back with Dr. Sara. Hello.
Hi everybody.
So as promised, this week we're back wanting to talk about gut health. So last week we had a number of questions. We'll get to a few of them here in a few moments. But last week we said that we really want to talk about the gut biosphere and what that means. There's so much probiotic news in the media now, and everyone's finally saying eat probiotics. And there's a lot of good, bad, and ugly. And we kind of want to tease this out for you guys because there are things that you need to know as consumers and as parents and as people with bodies that I think we'll be able to hash out and work out for you guys today.
Absolutely, and I also think it's important that we describe some of these terms because I think there's some terms that are confusing for people. There was just this Michael Pollan article in the New York Times Magazine. Some of my best friends are bacteria, and I wanted to just describe some of the terms that are there to get us started. One is microbiome. Microbiome is the set of DNA that goes with the bacteria that are in your body, especially your gut. The other is microbiota, which is basically the bacteria and the species that are in your gut. So two different terms that I think are important to define at the beginning. Fantastic.
Yes. Sometimes we have a tendency to geek out and use words freely here and then go, well, I mean, the first things first is, what's this whole thing about bacteria, right? It's, we went through this phase, in our Better Living Through Chemistry years where we, thought that all bugs are bad and we should nuke them all. And so we got really, really good at, using antibiotics. We started using hand sanitizers on everything, basically clean, 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 clean. And it really did change the world in a lot of ways because people were dying from infectious diseases and babies were dying all over the place. And, it became too much of a good thing, and so now we're kind of on this recoil where we're realizing we have been throwing the baby out with the bathwater, proverbially here, and that some of these bacteria, I would say more than some, a lot of this stuff that we've been trying to kill off and or ignore, neglect, is actually doing things for us in terms of gut absorption, in terms of psychological health, in terms of immunity and all this. And so now everything's kind of upside down and everyone's saying probiotics for everything. And one of the things I want to caution about is the big pharma has gotten into this game. So they're doing their little one-a-days with a dosage that is pretty much irrelevant from everything I've seen in the studies, right? And we were just talking about this earlier. I mean, you said, what was it, 15 billion is your minimum?
I would say an absolute minimum that even is worth the money is 15 billion a day. And a lot of people can't even tolerate that because their microbiota, the species of bacteria, are so limited that they can't handle more than 15 billion. But I would say that's the minimum threshold. Otherwise, you're just pooping out what you're taking in.
Yeah. And there's a really key point here, guys, is you can't stay on cheeseburgers and Diet Cokes and then just start taking a 15 billion probiotic pill and think that, the world's going to come, changing in a heartbeat, right? There's a prebiotic, the whole notion of prebiotics and foods that will help this stuff happen is really kind of a prerequisite. So you have to change to a diet that is higher in fiber and basically isn't so acidic and causing a lot of the other problems that we're having with gastritis and food combinations and all these types of things. So let me dig into that real quick, because having your body take various types of food at once is oftentimes confusing, right? So the pH or the acid level that your body needs your stomach to be at to break down, say, a steak is different than that of, say, a piece of bread or a dinner roll, right? And so what happens is when we start diluting and putting all these in there, we will have amylase and protease and all sorts of different enzymes coming out at once for different types of food, and the pH level gets a little skewed. So what happens is we have a harder time breaking this food down, and then you have a fermentation process and bacteria starts to rot in there. Then you get gas, you get bloating, you get all sorts of dysbiosis and things that America complains about on a daily basis. And then you got Larry the Cable Guy standing in front of some hot dog stand just saying take my antacid and life can go on. And we all know that doesn't work, right? It's a temporary fix. And so some of the studies we were talking about offline that I've been reading, and it's a bit bold, but I mean, this is data that's coming out, is if you've been on antibiotics, if you've wiped out your gut flora, the proper dose for re-inoculation is 400 billion per day for 7 days. Then you drop to about 30 billion for about 3 weeks, and then you can kind of cruise back down to 15 depending on where you're at. But we're talking about a significant amount of bacteria to get in, but almost like a tidal wave to recolonize your gut and get you back to a place of health. Now, some people will have diarrhea, some people will have loose stools. So again, you have to kind of ease into some of these things if you are not accustomed to this type of environment. And really the problem is overuse of antibiotics and you know, bad use and mixing of food. So I mean, maybe we could talk about the antibiotics for a minute, because that's one of the kind of primary culprits in all this, as we've gotten so good at using them that we use them for everything.
Can I jump in 1 second, Pedram, and just say that this 400 billion per day for 7 days idea, it's not do it yourself. Like, this is something that I would really recommend that you do with a functional medicine physician or someone who's well trained in the gut, because that's a massive amount of probiotics. We're talking about re-inoculating after you wipe out everything with antibiotics, for instance. But I think it's so important to realize that you don't want to be doing this on your own. It can also give you a die-off reaction, which can make you feel like crap. It can make you feel like you have the flu. There's just many things that can happen. So be cautious about that. Do it only under the direction of a clinician who's well-trained.
Yeah, good point. We do this with patients who are far gone, who come in after some, you know, Cipro dose or things like that, and we watch them and we monitor them, right? And so, again, one of the big things is, what are you eating, right? Are you already alkaline? Are you already having your broccoli? Are you already eating foods that are helping the system kind of move these bacteria out and along? Or are you you know, compromised? Is H. pylori kind of, you know, hanging out there? And if you've done all these different treatments for, you know, acid reflux and all these things, and things keep coming back, that's when you really, really, really need the supervision, because your body is already losing its compensatory mechanisms, and we need to figure out specifically what it is for an individual that needs to be done, right?
That's right. And, you know, I saw a patient yesterday who was saying to me, I've got a great diet. I eat, you know, lots of fresh fruits and vegetables. And I was asking her what she drank. And she has 2 Diet Pepsis a day. And I don't want to bash Pepsi. Well, maybe I do. But I want to just say that, you know, the highway patrolmen and women, when they're trying to get bloodstains off of the freeway after an accident, they use Coke, they use Pepsi, because it's so acidic and it gets rid of bloodstains. And we don't want that in the body. It is so acidic. So we want to be alkalinizing, just as you described. I just read about that this morning, so I wanted to add that piece in about the highway patrolman.
That's amazing. When I was a kid, I was drinking a can of Coke, and one of my dad's friends pulled me over and took this corroded penny and chucked it into a glass of Coke, brought it out, and it was shiny. And it was enough for me to just walk away. I said, well, I don't know what that was, but that doesn't look like something I want in my stomach. Right? But it's really highly addictive. I mean, I remember when I was in Bolivia, I did a tour of the original kind of Coke manufacturing plant where they were using cocaine. And then, you know, it turned out, you know, cocaine kind of fell out of political favor, if you will, when people realized what it was. And they made very slight modifications to the chemicals that went into that beverage to have it not be cocaine. But, you know, I know a lot of people who are addicted to Diet Coke in particular. And it's a very powerful addiction. I mean, I know people that will get a splitting headache and migraine if they don't have their Diet Coke in the morning to start. That's a bad sign, guys. You know, if that's how you're starting your day, chances are you've developed an addiction to something that is not good for you. And that's, you know, back to kind of pulling us into gut health here. It's destroying the pH balance of your system. And so no matter what you're doing for good bacteria or bad bacteria, it's constantly creating an environment where the bad stuff will be dominant, because it thrives in some of that kind of anaerobic, you know, highly acidic environment.
That's right. And I love to give people swaps instead of just saying, don't drink this, don't drink that. So one thing that I think is really valuable is to drink kombucha. We're going to get into some of the fermented foods where you can get these probiotics and re-inoculate as needed. Another one that I really like is water, filtered water with a tablespoon of apple cider vinegar, especially the type that has the mother, the little brown stuff at the bottom. So those are a few swaps that I think are helpful. I want to circle back to the antibiotics too, though, Pedram, because you started to go down that path and I pulled you off.
Yeah, well, I mean, there is an argument to be made for enhancing immunity. So this whole thing becomes kind of a chicken and egg conversation, right? Because gut health has been proven to help enhance your immune system. And so what happens is when you have poor gut health, the immune system's working very hard. You get things like leaky gut syndrome, and you get all sorts of dysbiosis. And if you think about it, the inside of your body, from your mouth all the way down to your anus, is actually the outside as well, right? So things are coming in, getting processed by your body, being pulled into the actual body, but this cavity is just a tube that things can pass through, that we can take things out of, right? And so when you have a bad environment in your gut, what happens is a lot of these bad guys start slipping through, getting into, crossing the cellular barriers, and there's different, permeability issues with gut health. But what happens is a chunk of food or some bacteria or some sort of foreign agent will come in. Your immune system says, this can't be in here, and it attacks it, right? And so that's fine, because that's how that mechanism is built. But if we do that day in and day out, meal after meal, Diet Coke after Pepsi, and all that kind of stuff, eventually that system starts to really get the immune system to drag. And when that happens, we become a lot more susceptible to infections, right? So now you're more susceptible to infection. Kid goes off to school, comes back with, runny nose and cough and sneeze. Next thing you know, you're sick again. You go to the doctor. What do they give you? Here's some amoxicillin. Here's another Z-Pack. And then what you do is, again, that kills all the bacteria. It's pretty indiscriminate. It's like dropping a bomb, right? And so it starts killing all the bacteria in your gut, and then the good bacteria are even more compromised. So next go around, your immunity is even weaker and weaker, and then we get into this kind of downward spiral of compromised immunity and poor bacterial health. So, the overuse of antibiotics can be fixed with the proper use of probiotics in a lot of ways, because as we enhance the system's ability to fight off disease, we don't get to this place where it's like, I have an ear infection and I'm coughing up Smurfs, so now I definitely need to go take the antibiotics. I'm not opposed to antibiotic use. I think they're really appropriate when it's hit the fan, right? But the problem is, how are people getting sick so often, and how's it hitting the fan, that often? And that has to do with how our bodies are set up and our immune systems are set up in the first place.
Yeah, such an important point. And I think immunity is one of the key aspects of why you should care about this. Why bother with paying attention to your gut, to your microbiome, your microbiota? But I think another few things that I just want to hit the highlights of include the obesity epidemic and some of the other chronic diseases that we see. A lot of people don't realize that it comes down to the diversity of your microbiome and like how diverse these bacteria are and their DNA. That tracks with your risk of obesity. It tracks with your risk of inflammatory bowel disease. There was just an article in the New York Times last week where a woman was describing being a donor of fecal transplants to a friend of hers who had Crohn's disease, or maybe it was ulcerative colitis, one of the inflammatory bowel diseases. And she basically worked with him. He did this do-it-yourself fecal transplants. Fecal transplants are really interesting. They're showing that they can change the insulin signaling that's happening in your body. So that whole problem of insulin resistance and how 1 in 2 Americans has insulin resistance, you can reverse it with fecal transplant. So I just wanted to say that this goes broader than just immunity, even though immunity is really important.
Yeah, you know what? A good point. Let's touch on this real quick, because there's Natasha McBride, gut and psychology syndrome, went through all sorts of issues with depression and addiction and food, basically food and gut health, right? And so one of the things that happens if you have bad gut health is gluten and casein in particular. So say, your wheats and your breads and all that, and casein, your dairy products will break down in a way where it's actually not complete, right? So what will happen is it'll become a glutamorphin or a casomorphin because what you need is the good bacteria in there to help you break down some of these agents and to help with some of the mediation of this breakdown. So now the word morphine, right, is a derivative of the same chemical that binds to our addictive, brain centers here that keep us craving and wanting more. So how many patients have you had in your clinic that just say, look, I can't live without my cheese, right?
Oh, so common. Just like I eat it addictively. I can't stop. And I also, you want me to go off of it? I can't. Like, I don't know how to do that.
Yeah, that's an addiction, guys. It's an addiction to the morphine part, the casomorphin part of this whole deal. And so there's a lot of addictive behavior. There's a lot of there's all sorts of stuff kind of now being looked at on the spectrum, autism and all these types of things with moms who have been dysbiotic and colony problems coming through. Because if you think about it, when you're inside a mama, you're in a sterile sac. Right? And so if you have a vaginal birth, which is what used to happen before this whole C-section generation, and we'll have a conversation with Alejandro Junger about this because he has a lot to say about this in a future episode. But you'll start to see with the C-section generation, a lot of the people that have grown into now in their 20s and stuff when after C-sections became really popular are developing a lot of gut health issues and all this, because what happens is the seed colony, guys, of your gut health that you get is on the way out of the vaginal canal, and it's the health of mama on your way out that will help determine what that's going to be, and in your early diet and in the milk and all that kind of stuff. So the early exposure to good bacteria is what helps us enhance our immunity and have a really kind of a symbiotic relationship with the earth around us, right? So it's like we're not independent, right? These bacteria are part of our life, and I don't have the number here in front of me, but I'll look it up if you guys are interested. Just ping us and give us a comment if you're interested in this. But there's a high percentage of our genetic makeup of the DNA in our body actually comes from the bacteria in our body, not necessarily from our human DNA, right? It's bacterial DNA that works with our human DNA for epigenetic expression and all kinds of stuff. Yes, I think you have it in hand. I love it. I love it.
So
yes.
It's actually 10x, which I think is so amazing. I'm just going to read a little bit from Michael Pollan. I can tell you the exact date that I began to think of myself in the first person plural, as a superorganism, that is, rather than a plain old individual human being. It happened on March 7th. That's when I opened my email to find a huge processor-choking file of charts and raw data from a laboratory located at the Biofrontiers Institute at the University of Colorado. He goes on, but he says another important point here that speaks to the number that you have from the bacteria. In sheer numbers, these microbes and their genes dwarf us. It turns out that we are only 10% human. For every human cell that is intrinsic to our body, there are 10 resident microbes, including commensals that are generally harmless freeloaders, and mutualists, favor traders, and only a tiny number of cases, pathogens. So 10x, you've got 10 times more bacterial DNA than you have human cell DNA.
Boom. Now, you know what? I'm so happy you had that on hand. Guys, think about this for a second. You are 10 times more bacteria than you are human. And what happens is a lot of times, you'll see this in some of the funky diseases that people get too, is the bacteria will sometimes even take over your consciousness and have you go eating funky things, right? Like, for iron, or people be chewing on metal and all kinds of diseases we studied in school. Because what'll happen is eventually they will take over the shop and they will tell you what they want. You'll see this a lot with people who have candida problems too, right? They'll start having cravings for things that the candida likes to eat on, right? So then the question really becomes, who's driving at a certain point? And for me, this is really powerful and spiritual in a lot of ways, because it really points to our symbiotic connection with all the life around us and our relationship with the earth. And so what happens now? You walk into every store, anywhere in the Western world, there's a bottle of Purell sitting there. It's just like sanitize, and it's antibiotic universe. And I'm not saying go smear yourself with staph or something, but I just got back from camping. It was 4th of July weekend. You're eating some food. It falls on the ground. You pick it up. You blow on it. If you even blow on it, you put it back in your mouth, right? Think about people back 10,000 years ago. You pull a root out of the ground. You kind of dust it off and you eat it. You put your hand in a river and you start drinking water straight out of there. There's tons and tons of bacteria that come from life all around us that were part of our internal ecosystem, which became part of our genetic makeup. And now that we've really shifted that and we're having GMO foods and processed foods that are all devoid of that, what's happening is we're becoming less, how shall I say, full spectrum.
Well, that's very well stated, Pedram, and I completely agree with that. A friend of mine, Daphne Miller, one of my classmates from medical school, just wrote a book called Pharmacology, spelled with an F, Pharmacology. and she did internships at different small farms around the U.S. One of the farms is called Jubilee in Washington. It's a biodynamic farm. And her first day of internship, the guy that was leading her, the owner of this farm, said to her, "Why don't we start by working on the tilth?" And she said, "What's tilth?" And he picked up a handful of soil and held it out to her and said, "This is good tilth. You know, it's full of really helpful bacteria." And it's kind of like when you see a patient, tilth is like good qi. You can tell the patients who have good qi, who are eating from really rich soils, who have the bacteria that you're talking about, versus those who are eating from poorer soils that have been stripped of this healthy, diverse, complex bacterial mix. And it's also why Michael Pollan named this article that he wrote for the New York Times Magazine, "Some of my best friends are bacteria." We want this. We want to figure out how to befriend bacteria again. How do we rebrand bacteria?
That's right. That's right. And it's a double-edged sword because there are certain bacteria that aren't great. But again, we threw the baby out with the bathwater. And most of these organisms out there that we've cohabitated and coexisted with are fine. And some of them are not fine only if they fall out of certain proportions. So again, it's the relationship with our bodies, our own kind of epigenetic expression, our immune systems. And so the moral of the story is the healthier you get and the better diversity and kind of healthy mix of bacteria that you have working with you, the less antibiotics you need and the better you feel and the better you can process your food and turn it into fuel versus having this kind of bolus of stuff show up and the body freaks out saying, "I don't know what to do with it." So it gets inflamed and it starts processing, sugars into fats and putting things away for a rainy day because it doesn't know what to do with it, right? If we're optimized as a system, then things flow better. All of a sudden we find that we're losing weight, we're getting sick less often. And even if you don't think that you're, some people think of sickness as I'm down drinking Theraflu for 3 days and calling my boss to get off work. But it's that low-grade immunity stuff that's really, what's the number one reason people go into doctors nowadays is really they say, "I'm tired," right? Guys, what is one of the biggest zappers of your energy is your immune system. It's working around the clock. And so if you don't give it the support it needs, no wonder you're tired. Right, and so that's something that I really kind of emphasize in the kind of vitality model of medicine that we practice here is just kind of getting people to realize that it's not the absence of symptoms that's health. It's that vibrancy. It's like that soil you're holding up, that chi that's kind of emanating out of the patient, and that's when you know that they're good. Right? Does stuff happen? Do they still get sick now and again? Yeah, but they're the ones that bounce back in an afternoon or a day or whatever. Not the ones that are out 10, 12, 20 days a year. Because they're just so sick, all they could do is sit home and watch reruns of Scooby-Doo. You know what I mean? That's no way to live.
So true. And I want to make sure that we emphasize some of the practical solutions here rather than to dwell in the problem. So we talked about kombucha. I think it would be worthwhile to maybe, in addition to probiotics, circle back to the food sources of, improving the diversity of your microbiome. So, Pedram, you want to take kimchi?
I'm a big kimchi fan, and I'm going to geek out with you guys right now. So, apparently there's about 187 versions of kimchi. By the way, kimchi is kind of a traditional fermented cabbage dish that the Koreans are all about, right? And when I say the Koreans are all about it, average of 40 kilos per person per year in Korea of kimchi, okay?
40 kilos.
Yeah. So check this out, you guys. In 2003, an outbreak of what became known as SARS in Asia, while other countries were back, SARS virus came out. All the other countries are hit really hard. Korea was virtually untouched. And so they looked at Korean chickens infected with the avian flu virus, and they recovered quickly or quicker after eating food that would contain some of the good bacteria found in kimchi. And then they did a subsequent study on 200 chickens by the Korean Food Research Institute supporting the theory that it enhanced immunity and basically it protected against even the worst viruses and bacteria. So the lactic acid that's produced during the fermentation process stops the growth of the bad bacteria and it's useful in the prevention, of conditions such as yeast infections, UTIs, obesity, diabetes, and gastrointestinal cancers. Okay, so it's the when we talk about this lactic acid and the fermentation process, it's this kind of, how shall we say, this reflection of life that's coming from the bacteria that we want, right? That is now creating an environment where the bad guys can't thrive. Okay, it's also obviously high in fiber, vitamin A, vitamin C, calcium, iron, beta carotene, and then after undergoing 3 weeks of fermentation, it's really high in levels of B1, B2, and B12. They all double. Okay, so basically, it gets rid of the bad bacteria, and it also, there's some studies that show that it stabilizes blood sugar levels and some of the intense hunger pangs and cravings. So, I mean, you look at all that, and then there's some more, I could geek out some more, Journal of Medicinal Food showing that it drops low cholesterol, LDL levels, and fasting blood glucose levels after just 1 week. And then there was another study with Busan National University in Korea with 100 young men who ate about half a pound daily, much greater drops in cholesterol, but they saw it in people that ate a little less as well. Okay, so kimchi, and Wendy was just telling me that there's families in Korea that she knows of that'll take 2 days off a year, and the whole family will get together and just basically make kimchi that'll last them the whole year. They put it in containers, they let it ferment, and it's just this delicacy kind of thing, but it's eaten with everything because it helps as a digestive, it helps as an antibacterial, antiviral, and it helps us absorb and process our foods better. And again, those B vitamins, you're talking about fatigue. That's if you don't have it, and we talked about this in the Vitality movie, a lot of these good bacteria help us absorb our B vitamins, right? And so if you're not getting it from your food, then you're taking it in supplements, but it's never the same, right? So, we've talked about this pretty much on every episode is whole, if you could go whole foods, that's the way to go.
Well, I love it. I mean, what a fantastic scholarly trip through kimchi. Thank you. And, I also want us to talk about making breakfast more savory. As I'm listening to you describe kimchi, I think we should be having it for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. 2 tablespoons, maybe with 2 poached eggs in the morning for breakfast, 2 tablespoons added to lunch and dinner. And I think it's so important to realize that you can buy this stuff. Like, you can buy it organic. It's just that our palate is not used to it, but it can become used to it because it's one of those medicinal foods. This is the kind of information you want for the 10% of your genome that's human, and especially for the 90% that is microbial. So I think that's so important. Thank you for that. And yeah. I want to emphasize a few other favorite sources of probiotics. I love artisanal sauerkraut. So I get sauerkraut from my local health food store. It comes in a little jar. I can get it with beets. I can get it with seaweed. There's lots of different ways to get sauerkraut. I'm a big fan of that. I also really love non-GMO miso. So I make miso soup. I use it in my sauces. It's a great way to do kind of a non-dairy sauce. I just think it's important to realize that up to about 90% of soy that's available in the U.S. is GMO. So you want to be careful that it's non-GMO. Hopefully we'll do another session very soon on why you want to avoid GMOs. But those are some of my favorites. Natto is another favorite, but I'm also kind of a super freak when it comes to eating, and that's not everyone's taste.
And one that is getting more and more popular is kefir. So, my only thing with that is look for an organic version, because it is dairy-based. And a lot of times it's made with goat's milk. But again, that fermentation process comes with bacteria, right? That's the whole point, is the way you make these yogurts is you boil the milk, you do this process, and then you add cultures of bacteria, which then take over and become this food called yogurt, right? And kefir is very kind of concentrated in that. I have one of the docs, maybe we'll have him on, Dr. Ben Joseph from the Vitality movie as well. He has a formula where he takes a bunch of nuts and seeds and things and blends them in, and then puts in kefir and sauerkraut and miso and all, just every type of good bacteria you can find. He lets them ferment and become these kind of like patties, these cakes that are actually pretty tasty. And he does that, and again, he'll do maybe once every quarter or so. He'll make a bunch and he'll have it and give it to his grandkids and all that. And those kids just don't get sick. right? And so there's a lot to be said, guys, for this. I mean, kimchi, there's definitely an odor that comes with it. If you could tolerate it, great. Frankly, I don't care, but if my wife can tolerate it, great. And so some of these foods have odor, some of them don't. Play around with medicinal food. Now, real quick, because I know we're running out of time. Probiotic pills and supplements. Any advice that you have for people on that? Because there's the food and then the supplements, and I want to make sure we cover both because our people are very busy, and some of them don't have time to prepare this stuff.
Sure. Well, I always love to give a couple of supplement brands because I'm not affiliated with any one, and some of the ones that I take personally and recommend to my clients include Claire Labs, Klaire. I also use Integrative Therapeutics. They've got a really great brand that is an intensive source of probiotics that you can keep at room temperature, so it's nice for traveling. And then I also like Flora Blend from Thorne. So those are 3 that I like a lot.
Fantastic. And again, you guys, 15 billion is kind of like your number there. And if you start getting into high dose, work with your physician, work with your healthcare practitioner, work with someone to help make some of those transitions. And one thing I'd like to add is, if you're having all sorts of gut issues, the tendency of the market is to say, oh, this week it's resveratrol, this week it's pycnogenol, this week it's this, then now it's probiotics, right? It's complicated, right? So as much as I want to say probiotics are the panacea for a lot of things, I want to say you got to look at other things too, right? So if you're having constant GI upset, you want to look at food allergies, you want to look at food combination, you want to look at, just work with somebody and don't try to self-diagnose, if you will. And then they can hold your hand and walk you through this, but then say, look, I want to choose a whole food algorithm. I want to choose to kind of enhance my vitality and build myself up. And then all of the stuff that we've talked about today becomes a very powerful tool to attain those goals, but don't always try to go it on your own without some sort of health advice from someone who can kind of take a look at you and make sure that you're doing the right thing. And again, we've said this before, we'll say it again. If your doctor doesn't want to play, there's plenty of good doctors out there. Just find a good doctor who's kind of functionally trained and wants to help enhance your system instead of just keep you coming back for your regular checkups and giving you the drugs that he thinks you need.
Yeah, beautifully stated. And, Mark Hyman talks about how pretty much all disease begins in the gut. And I think that's so important. We haven't, in a systematic way, gone through the 4 Fs or the 4 Rs, the 4R of, repairing your gut. Some people even use the 5 Rs. Maybe we can do that in a future session. But I agree with that. I think it's very important. Even as physicians, we work with other physicians to take care of our own gut. And I think that's important for all of us.
Absolutely. And it's very easy to make a couple bad food decisions and start kind of going into a tailspin and then having a sugar craving, and then because of that having this and having that, and now I need coffee. And it's very easy to kind of fall off the perch. And it takes about 2-3 days to kind of get back on track sometimes. So as you become aware of that, it helps make and kind of inform more enlightened food decisions as well, so you're not doing this yo-yo thing all the time. And I can attest to that. We're human, right? I get into trouble with that all the time, and then I'll have to kind of fix that and bring myself back to center because you go to the birthday party, you have a piece of cake, next thing you know, things change, right?
Yeah, I agree with that. I was talking to Mark Hyman just last week at Wanderlust, and he said something so profound. He said, when you're driving and you've got your GPS on and you make a wrong turn, it doesn't say to you, "You're so stupid, what's wrong with you? Why are you eating that donut and turning the wrong way?" It says, at the next possible place, make a legal U-turn. And that's what we want to be doing with our health. That's what we want to be helping you with. How do you make that legal U-turn and get back on the path?
Beautifully said. God, Mark Hyman is so good with those.
He's so good. I know, and he's cute.
He's a sweetheart. I'm really bummed. I was actually supposed to be in Wanderlust with you guys. I'm bummed that I didn't get to see you guys. I'll go visit him on the East Coast, and let's have him on as a guest. I think we'd have some fun having him on here. Yeah, excellent. Guys, right before we check out here, we did have one comment that I definitely wanted to get to, because last week when we were talking about broccoli, there was some confusion. We mentioned this a couple times, but there's all this talk out there about broccoli being harmful for people who suffer from thyroid problems. Okay, so Janet from Bogota, Colombia, I want to reach out and say, there is some talk along these lines, but it's not as substantiated. And Sarah, I'll let you jump on this real quick.
Yeah, a couple of things about the whole goitrogen risk, and oh my gosh, should you stay away from all the brassicas like Brussels sprouts and broccoli if you have a thyroid problem? I looked at this literature really thoroughly when I wrote my book, The Hormone Cure, and I was underwhelmed by the effect of these vegetables, which are so full of things that are so good for you, and their effect on the thyroid. So first of all, if you cook them, they have less of an effect on the thyroid. Second of all, just looking at the raw ones and their effect on the thyroid, the data is underwhelming. A lot of it is in animals, and whether it actually has an effect on humans, I think is debatable. There's probably some people who have an effect. You can sort of see if that's true for you. But I think to make a global statement about staying away from this really important source of vegetables because of a fear around the thyroid is probably misguided. The answer is somewhere in the middle. I think this may be one of those archaic, folklore ideas when it comes to natural health and natural medicine, people saying stay away from the brassicas, whereas I think they probably have more benefit than harm. But see what's true for you. Track your thyroid levels and see what happens. Just don't miss out on those antioxidants that we all need.
Well said. You know who I think we should have on as a guest is Datis Karazian as well. He is really an expert on this thyroid thing, and according to him and a lot of these people that we've been talking about, a good percentage, I think 80% of the Hashimoto's thyroid that we're seeing out there is autoimmune, and is coming from either food or some sort of antibody issue that we're having with something that's going into our body. So this whole thyroid thing in general tends to be a bit blown out, and there's some natural ways to look at it, and maybe we'll invite him on as a guest to have a whole show on thyroid to help Janet and all the people who have kind of asked these types of questions and get to the bottom of it some more.
That's right. And what I think is important, Pedram, is that we take on some of these myths or some of these standards that we have in natural medicine, conventional medicine in our show, and not take it, standing down. I think it's really important that we say, okay, what does the literature actually show us? Are we making an oversimplified summary of this idea, like, that broccoli slows down your thyroid? What's the real truth? So that's what I'm really delighted to offer to our listeners.
Love it. Love it. Guys, hit us up with comments, questions. We will answer them as fast as we can, either online or offline, but we're getting to them, and give us questions about what you would like to see in future topics. I mean, we've got, several weeks lined up right now, but we get a lot of requests, and we want to hear from you. So keep them coming. And Dr. Sara, always a pleasure. I'm looking forward to our next encounter. Have yourself a wonderful week.
Thanks, Pedram. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for listening.
Thank you, everybody. Bye.